Okay, we are up to Jeremiah 31, and it's an interesting story. As we'll see, there is a little bit obscure little group that he brings in as a model. They're honorable men, the Rechabites, and so I titled it "Honoring the Honorable" here, and it is in contrast to the recent chapters where people were not acting honorably, and so work through that. Now, I wanted to locate about where we are in the big picture. That this is the outline of Jeremiah thus far, and you see the introduction, and then the prophecies concerning Judah, and we are still in those prophecies concerning Judah. We've been through the divine judgment on Judah. Just that was relentless. That was a hard 24 chapters there. Uh, Going through divine judgment. Then the personal conflict with those in Judah, those attacking him, and you know, threatening him. And then we went into the book of consolation, chapters 30 through 33. That was nice, and that was God saying, consoling people. Yes, you're going to go into captivity, but I'm going to draw you back, and I've still got a plan for you. I've got a new covenant that I'm going to bring to you. Then we are now in what a section called the present catastrophe in Judah, chapters 34 through 45. We're up to 35, so we've just gone into before the fall, that fall being the Babylonian captivity in 586. So, so chapter 35 and then 36 will be before the Babylonian captivity. Then we'll have several chapters during the fall, and then chapters 40 through 45 will be after they've gone into captivity. And so that is about where we are. So chapter 35 is focusing on the Rechabites, and we'll look at several things about who these Rechabites are. They're a little bit obscure for us, I think. And so God calls Jeremiah and tells him to go speak to the Rechabites. Now, the Rechabites are Hebrews, but they are nomads. They live down in the south wilderness, southern wilderness. They lived in tents, as we'll see. But because Nebuchadnezzar has swept in and surrounded Jerusalem, these Rechabites have gone to the last refuge of the Hebrews, Jerusalem now. The word which came to Jeremiah from the Lord in the days of Jehoiakim. So this is anywhere from 11 to 20 years earlier than chapter 34. So chapter 34 was um, chapter 34 was 586 or so, 587 BC. This has gone back at least 11 years to about 598, but it could be as many as 11 years earlier than that, so we could be all the way back to 609 BC. So that would be 609 would be 23 years before the fall of Jerusalem. In the days of Jehoiakim, who was the second son of Josiah, when he was king of Judah, he was he was not a good king. He was a little bit delusional. He defied Babylon, he defied Egypt. He had a lot of building projects. When the people were in bad shape, he was forcing them to work and build buildings and things like that. So Jehoiakim was a bad guy. Jehoiakim was the daddy of Jehoiachin, who ruled for 3 months and was taken to Babylon. And we know, if you may remember, Jehoiachin was the line of descendancy to the Messiah. That is Jesus' ancestor, Jehoiachin, and his daddy Jehoiakim. God tells Jeremiah, go to the house of the Rechabites and speak to them. Bring them into the house of the Lord, uh, the temple of Solomon, into one of the chambers, and give them wine to drink. So there are off the main, we know the main thing, the holy place, the Holy of Holies, but there are little rooms off to the side, apartments, and in the temple and in the compound, there are places where people live, different ones of the attendants that that do, because things happen so regularly, doing these sacrifices, lighting the incense, all these things, that there are people that live there at the temple waiting for their rotation, to do whatever service they do. This prophecy in chapter 35 was given during the reign of Jehoiakim, as I said, at least 11 years, and possibly as many as 20 years earlier than the prophecies in chapter 34. So just to give you a little idea, I don't know how well you can see that, but you see at the top, number one is Josiah. Josiah was the good king. He reigned for 31 years from 640 to 609. He was a reformer. He was calling them back to the Lord. Uh, he was the one who found, we think, Deuteronomy and began having Deuteronomy preached. Then he went out in 609 to fight the Egyptians. The Egyptians were going up the coast to help the Assyrians, who were battling the Babylonians and trying to do a coalition against the Babylonians. And for whatever reason, Josiah went out to fight the Egyptians. Now, Chronicles is critical of that. In Kings, it doesn't say anything bad about it. But later, Chronicles, which is kind of during the exile reflecting back, is saying Josiah did that on his own. God didn't tell him to do that, which is just an interesting. It's really neither here nor there, but it is interesting that he would oppose Egypt, who was trying to oppose Babylon, and it ended up being Babylon is the one that got him. Then Josiah's three sons that were king was Jehoiahaz, who was also called Shallum. He only reigned for 3 months. And then Necho, the Pharaoh of Egypt, who killed Josiah, took him prisoner and he died in Egypt. Then Jehoiakim, we just talked about, who had grown up Eliakim, and they changed his name to Jehoiakim when he became king. He reigned for 11 years. And we'll look at another graphic in a minute that'll have the years. And then his brother Zedekiah, who I don't know why they didn't give his name. I believe it was Mattaniah was his grow-up name and changed to Zedekiah. He was appointed king by Nebuchadnezzar. And he reigned for 11 years and was the final. Before he did, Jehoiachin, who is also known as Jeconiah and Coniah, reigned for 3 months and was taken to Babylon. And as I just said a moment ago, the line of descendancy, the messianic line, goes through Jeconiah. Josiah, Jehoiakim, Jeconiah, and his descendant Zerubbabel, who was named after Gideon. Zerubbabel, I presume he was. Gideon's name was Zerubbabel. Came back. Zerubbabel was the one who came back from Babylonian captivity and helped build the temple. So another graphic to look at that, just giving you the how long they reigned, how the years that they were reigned. You see Jehoiakim 608 BC to 597. He was subject first to Egypt, and then Egypt and Babylon fought a battle, and Babylon won, and Babylon ruled over him. Nebuchadnezzar he had rebelled again against Nebuchadnezzar at the end. Nebuchadnezzar was coming to get him when he died. A lot of people think that they assassinated Jehoiakim when Nebuchadnezzar was coming in order to be able to tell the Babylonians he was a nut job to rebel against you, and we took him out. Nebuchadnezzar appointed his son, so Jehoiakim's son, Jehoiachin, as king for 3 months, and then took him to Babylon, you see there, and then Zedekiah. So just giving you, it's so much to keep up with. I want to keep giving you those graphics to keep up with it. So on to verse 3. Jeremiah says, Then I took Jezaniah, the son of Jeremiah, who was the son of Habaziniah, his brothers, and all his sons, and the whole house of the Rechabites. So let's talk about the Rechabites a little bit. Why is chapter 35 here? It's placed here to contrast how faithful these Rechabites are, these nomads, with the unfaithfulness of the people of Judah that we saw in chapter 34. So the Rechabites were a nomadic clan descended from Jehonadab, son of Rechab, who assisted Jehu in exterminating Baal worship. Jehu is a very interesting character. Jehu was a military guy. He was a general. And Jehu was a butcher. Now, Ahab and Jezebel were so evil. This is very similar. Jehu kind of reminds me of Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar is not a good person. Nebuchadnezzar does not love God. But God uses Nebuchadnezzar to work his plan out. It's that the bill has come due for Judah. The consequences of their apostasy has come due. And so God uses Nebuchadnezzar, who is not faithful, to go and punish Judah, take them into bondage. God didn't love Nebuchadnezzar, as he does the faithful. I kind of think Jehu is the same kind of person. Jehu was the king after Ahab, but he was wicked. He was apostate. He was not a good king. He was not a faithful man. And he butchered Ahab and his family, Jezebel, who were warned, and they had it coming. But it is one of those kind of ugly stories. And we see those a lot in the Old Testament. And, I did my dissertation on a lot of these violent things that happen in the Old Testament. And we've talked about this before, especially in the book of Judges. When the stories get just really graphic and awful, those stories are meant to appall us and warn us away from what the people do. You think back to Genesis 34. Dinah goes running around, running wild. She gets taken prisoner and raped, and they hold her prisoner. Then they negotiate for her. Simeon and Levi come in, and they're enraged. Jacob is being very passive. He is entertaining their offers to assimilate, marry into the Shechemites. He is failing. Simeon and Levi go into a rage. They lie and they trick and they execute those men. And then the other brothers come and loot Shechem. It's an appalling story.
God had told Jacob to go back to his father. And when they was in the land of Shechem, they tried to get Jacob to settle there.
Right.
And to mingle with their people.
Right. And they had been commanded not to.
Levi and Simeon went in and killed all those men.
Right. Butchered them.
He butchered them.
Yeah.
But you see, that was God's plan, because the seed that that Jesus was to come by, had to remain pure. If
Right.
Jacob would have stayed in that land and mingled with them people,
right,
her seed would not be pure.
Right. And see, Dinah, I think all of that really happened, but Dinah represented all the women that would carry the seed of Jesus, that was going to become Jesus. And to give her away, and so to mingle with the people was the same thing as giving Dinah to Shechem, just like Abraham. And it wasn't the first time we'd seen that, was it? Abraham, first thing when God promised him the land in chapter 12, immediately he went to Egypt and he gave Sarai into Pharaoh's harem. Then later he gave her to Abimelech. Then Isaac gave Rebekah into Abimelech. And then
see, Jacob, he wasn't a very good leader.
He was awful. He was a train wreck.
Because he was going to stay there and mingle with them.
Right.
Until they killed all those men.
And so, everybody in that story did bad. And what you find when you see those stories, and the story of Jehu we're comparing to is the same way. Everybody is a bad guy. It'd be an awful movie. Have you ever watched a movie and everybody in the movie was a bad guy? That's no fun. We like there to be a good guy, and we like them to be wrongfully done, accused, and then they're able to overcome it. That's not the story of Jehu. And the purpose of those stories are to horrify us. Now, for us, all these centuries later, it is to warn us against compromising our beliefs. When we begin to watch TV, computer, and they say, the Bible's been passed around, you don't really have to listen to it, then we have the temptation that Jacob had, compromise. We know we are to stand our ground. We are to stand firm on what God has told us. He has given us His Word. We can open it and read it as much or as little as we choose to. We are to stand firm on it. This world calls us to compromise, to water it down, to modify it, to update it. That Genesis 34 is a warning against compromise and getting passive and letting, modern philosophy kind of just passively drag you along. And, we used to think that was bad, but it doesn't seem like it's so bad anymore. That's what this world wants, and that's a warning story. So you see these warning stories are very graphic. You're supposed to be troubled when you read Genesis 34. If you read it and you have no problems, then you need to probably go see a psychologist or something. There's something wrong with you. Well, that's the same with Jehu. Jehu is a butcher, and he is a bad person. However, he was an instrument in the hand of God. And so Simeon and Levi would be likewise. Simeon and Levi did wrong. One thing you said, everything you said was good, Faye. When it came to Simeon and Levi, those men of Shechem deserved to be killed.
God wanted them killed.
He did. I agree with you 100%. The way that they went about doing it through trickery and getting them to circumcise and telling them they're going to become Hebrews, and while they were in pain to go in and butcher them, that caused the Canaanites to threaten the seed. So they also caused threat. Jacob said, "You have made us a stench in the nostril of our enemies." And so that's what I'm saying. They did, in the end, I believe, God wanted the Shechemites to pay for what they had done with Dinah. But there was a better way to go about it. I mean, I truly think, having studied it, that Jacob needed to step forward. Jacob needed to say, "You bring my daughter back right now. And once I get her back, then I want you to go get your swords, and we're going to fight."
But God had told Jacob to go back to his father's house. And
yes.
He wasn't going to go back.
And he wasn't to mix with the people. And so the thing is, everybody did bad. So Jehu did bad. Now, however, the Rechabites' ancestor helped Jehu, and as he went and he butchered. Now, he was butchering people that deserved to be butchered, that had it butchering coming. And so in that way, he was acting as an instrument in God's hand. And this is hard for people. This is just so hard for modern people to understand this kind of concept. But I found it fascinating, and it got me a PhD. So back in 2 Kings chapter 10, verse 15, when Jehu left there, he met Jehonadab, the son of Rechab. So this is the ancestor of the Rechabites that we're talking about in Jeremiah. And this would have been 150 years or so before Jeremiah. Jehu said to Jehonadab, "Are you as loyal to me as I am to you?" "Yes, I am," Jehonadab replied. Then Jehu said, "Now come with me, and see how devoted I am to the Lord. I'm going to do a hard thing. So Jehonadab rode along with him. When Jehu arrived in Samaria, Samaria being the capital of the northern kingdom of Israel, so the name Samaritan comes from the city of Samaria. It was not very far from Shechem. Shechem is kind of the heartland of the Samaritans, ironically. And the problem with the Samaritans is that they were mixed people. They were half-breeds, we would say. Um, they had intermarried with the people that had been transplanted by Assyria there. And so Samaria is very close to Shechem. It was a city created by Omri, who was a great builder. And so when Jehu, and that is where Ahab and Jezebel had their palace. Ahab and Jezebel, their crime was not only did they not listen to God, they actively, Jezebel was a pagan, had grown up a pagan, and she wanted Ahab to build shrines to her pagan gods. And so they built worship centers all around Israel for the Israelites to worship these pagan gods. And so when Jehu arrived in Samaria, he killed all who was left there from Ahab's family. He had previously, the story with Jezebel being thrown out the window and the dogs eating her. Just as the Lord had promised through Elijah, Jehu summoned all the worshippers of Baal in Samaria and all the priests of Baal, and they came. No one remained behind, and they filled the temple of Baal from one end to the other. Then Jehu went into the temple of Baal with Jehonadab, son of Rechab. Now Jehu had stationed 80 of his men outside. He commanded his guards, go in and kill all of them. Don't let even one person escape. And they did. They wiped out all the priests. And Jehonadab served as his lieutenant. So it's a bloody history, but it is, I'll tell you, that would take a lot of faith and a lot of loyalty to participate in that. These stories are just so challenging for modern people. They're just so challenging. Evidently, after this, Jonadab rejected a settled way of life for the life of a nomad. So he didn't want to live in the cities. They wanted to roam in the nomadic, in the wilderness. And his lifestyle became the norm for his clan. So his sons and grandsons continued. They traveled the wilderness of the Negev. Negev is the Hebrew word for south. So the Negev is the southern desert below Jerusalem. They were forced to move Jerusalem when Nebuchadnezzar threatened Judah in 598 BC. So there were apartments or chambers in the temple court, maybe in the temple building itself, little apartments sometimes where people lived. Jeremiah said, and I brought them into the house of the Lord, into the chamber of the sons of Hanan, the son of Igdaliah, a man of God, which was by the chamber of the princes, or princes, officials. They were by the chamber where officers would meet. You'll see this translated different ways. Above the chamber of Messiah, the son of Shallum, the keeper of the door. As we'll see in a moment, this doorkeeper is an important office in the temple. The doorkeeper is a high position because those holding it, we know, were singled out by the Babylonians for judgment along with the chief priest. So doorkeeper must be right below the chief priest in the hierarchy in the temple attendance. In 2 Kings 25:18, the captain of the guard took Sariah, the chief priest, Zephaniah, the second priest, and the 3 doorkeepers, and took them into captivity. Into this high company, Jeremiah brought these old, sandy, rough, nomadic Rechabites. Now the Rechabites were teetotalers. Then I set before the sons of the house of Rechabites bowls full of wine and cups, and said to them, drink wine. Everybody drinks wine in this culture. But they said, we will drink no wine, for Jonadab, the son of Rechab, our father, commanded us, saying, you shall not drink no wine, you nor your sons forever. Obedient to Jonadab. You shall not build a house. In addition to not drinking, you're not to build a house, sow seed, plant a vineyard, nor have any of these things. But all the days you shall dwell in tents, that you may live many days in the land where you are sojourners. That is a heritage thing, I think. Abraham was a sojourner. And I think these Rechabites are conservatives, in a manner of speaking, holding on to the way that Abraham did, feeling that they communed with God better in this free lifestyle as Abraham did. I'm speculating there on why Jonadab would want this, but thus we have obeyed the voice of Jonadab our father and all that he charged us, to drink no wine all of our days, we, our wives, our sons, or our daughters, nor to build ourselves houses to dwell in, nor do we have a vineyard, a field, or seed, but we have dwelt in tents, and have obeyed and done according to all that Jonadab our father commanded us. But it came to pass, when Nebuchadnezzar king of Babylon came up into the land, that we said, come, let us go to Jerusalem, for fear of the army of the Chaldeans, and for fear of the army of the Syrians. So we dwell at Jerusalem now. So as I said, we're given this story because of God finds the behavior and the commitment of the Rechabites to be honorable. Verse 12, then came the word of the Lord to Jeremiah, saying, thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, go and tell the men of Judah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem, will you not receive instruction and obey my word, says the Lord? Like the Rechabites have been obedient to their ancestor, their contrast. God approved of the way that the Rechabites were. The words of Jonadab, the son of Rechab, which he commanded his sons not to drink wine, are performed, for this day they drink none, and obey their father's commandment. So they are an example of obedience. Now, not necessarily a condemnation of drinking alcohol here. More the idea is that these are honorable men that are obedient to a commandment of their ancestor who is to be respected. By contrast, talking to the men of Judah and Jerusalem, although I have spoken to you, Judah, God saying, I have spoken commandments to you, rising early and speaking, you have not obeyed me. Judah has rejected God's wisdom. I have sent to you all my servants, the prophets, rising up early and sending them, saying, turn now, everyone from his evil way, amend your doings, and do not go after other gods and serve them. If you do that, then you will dwell in the land which I have given you and your fathers. But you've not inclined your ear, nor obeyed me. And so what is the consequence when I gave you a good land and told you to stay with me and you've not done it? I'm going to take you out of the land. And again, I always talk, the land, the concept of the land is very important. That is the place where they go to dwell with God. And so to cast them out of the land is to move them out of relationship with God. They were in the land, but not in relationship with God, and so it is a symbol of that separation. So there is a contrast here. Surely the sons of Jehonadab, the son of Rechab, have performed the commandment of their father, which he commanded them, but this people, Judah, has not obeyed me. And the consequences of refusal to heed that warning, therefore, says Yahweh, God of hosts, the God of Israel, behold, I will bring on Judah and all the inhabitants of Jerusalem all the doom that I have pronounced against them. Now remember, we're still anywhere from 11 to 20 years ahead of. This is still forecasting the coming doom. And that's hard to keep your mind in the right place with Jeremiah because he jumps back and forth so much. This is the Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians is still in the future, at least a decade. That I have pronounced against them because I have spoken to them and they have not heard. And I have called to them, but they have not answered. Okay, that brings us to the end of chapter 35. It was a short little chapter. We'll get, oh, no, there's one more here. And Jeremiah said to the house of the Rechabites, thus says Yahweh of hosts, the God of Israel, because you have obeyed the commandment of Jonadab your father, keeping all his precepts and done according to all that he commanded you. Therefore, thus says Yahweh of hosts, God of Israel, Jonadab the son of Rechab shall not lack a man to stand before me forever. And I think that is symbolic of, to stand before me would be like the chief priest going into the Holy of Holies and standing before the Ark of the Covenant. He's saying eternal access. There will always be a man of faith among the Rechabites who will have access to Yahweh, face to God's face. And that brings us to the end of chapter 35. I think a very interesting little contrast there. It's all very interesting. We'll end there and we'll pick up next week in chapter 36. Chapter 36 is one of those, I say, more important chapters. It is a pretty significant chapter. A lot of stuff going on. We see a lot of how the Bible it was recorded and written down in chapter 36. We see the king attacking. That's the chapter where the king takes a knife and cuts up a scroll and throws it in the fire. And Jeremiah goes and retells it to Baruch. Baruch writes it down, and then he goes and reads it at the temple. And so it will be a good chapter. But I thought this Rechabite story was a very interesting little thing. Any questions or comments as we get ready to close? All right, let's say a prayer and be dismissed.